Thanks everyone for joining. I'm fairly confident I've spoken to most of you in the last 5 or 6 months or prior to that in my other roles, so I won't spend too long on who I am, but welcome to the West of England Plus Local Skills Improvement Plan Trailblazer debrief Q&A session. We've got a light agenda, so we're going to go through what the Trailblazer pilot found, what some of the recommendations are, and then we'll have a Q&A session. And then there's a semi-brief session on what the next steps are, what the next phase may look like, and what that means for us going forwards, and discussion following that. And then we'll close. A reminder too, we all work within Business West, so please do drop a line. I'm sure you'll have the email address for the Local Skills Improvement Plan team following this, but please do just get in touch. We're more than happy to have detailed conversations outside of this as well. So we work within the Chambers of Commerce within Business West, and the Local Skills Improvement Plan Trailblazer was funded by the Department for Education. It was a fairly discreet 6-month research and evaluation project which was completed on the 31st of March. Next slide, please. So I'm going to start referring to the LSIP now instead of saying the whole thing because it's a bit of a mouthful. But it's part of the Skills for Job white paper. So this was part of the government's overarching strategy to change the way that post-16 technical education is delivered, to incorporate more about employer needs and employer voice, and to put them more at the heart of education and training, planning and delivery. And the LSIP was the counterpart to the other part of the Skills Accelerator, which was the Strategic Development Fund pilots, which in this patch was delivered via the Institute of Technology for the West of England. And I believe Claire Arbery is also on this call. So if you have any questions about how they relate together that I don't cover, we should be able to cover that as well. But the Strategic Development Fund is all about changing delivery and trialing delivery to develop a system going forwards to give businesses things that they need in almost rapid succession, and also to incorporate the findings of the LSIP as we go along. Next slide, please. So in this project, we took a fairly in-depth methodology as our core route to find out what businesses want. We firmly believe that I'm going to use West of England, I mean West of England Plus, but the patch that we covered is ahead of the curve. We are already more collaborative. We have a really good data set on what businesses need, how sectors are changing, where our priorities are, where the gaps are. So we really wanted to add current, robust and granular data from businesses as they see it now on their current and future skills needs, and then translate that following this gathering phase into what that might mean for skills provision going forwards. So primary methods we used were semi-structured interviews. We wrote our interview methodology and script essentially, and then we used events to coincide with that, which either went through the same structure or they pulled out elements either in our method or that businesses had started to reinforce the things we needed to look at further. So we divided the questions up into 5 primary sections, which was business growth, workforce development, recruitment, retention and upskilling, technological change, including how digital is changing industry, and then climate change and sustainability. And then all of our data we used to reinforce what we knew and investigate further how this can be translated into training provision. Next slide, please. So I mean, this map, ignore the dots to a limited degree, or it's kind of a heat map of the non-business people we spoke to. But this was our geographic remit. So we covered a patch called the West of England Plus. This was primarily to replicate the patch of the Institute of Technology for the West of England, but it replicates as well the functional economic market area of the aerospace cluster in this region. So we have Gloucester and Stroud in the north, the whole of the West of England LEP area in the middle, and the top 3 districts of Somerset. So, and again, for the aerospace cluster, that means you've got all of the primes in the region included. And It also incorporates some of the really valuable training providers who work with this cluster and others, but all of the partners of the Institute of Technology. Next slide, please. So just some very quick snapshots of the audiences we were looking at. So the health and social care sector in the West of England plus area, we did some analysis aligned with the combined authorities data, and then incorporated it for the other districts of the LEP areas we're covering. But there's over 3,500 companies working in social care, employing at least 24,000 people. And on the right-hand side, you can see a small breakdown of the job roles we spoke to, where they were known, and the sizes of the companies that were reported to us. And you'll get all of these slides afterwards. Next slide, please. Aerospace, I think most people are aware, is considered one of the priority sectors in our wider patch. It's globally significant. It drives a lot of R&D and technological innovation within the sector. Over 2,000 businesses, 36,000 plus people working in advanced engineering and aerospace. Both of these sectors saw really significant impacts of both the C and B words, Brexit and COVID. Big changes to the workforce, big changes to the available pool to bring people in, big changes to the skills profiles. Colloquially, and I still haven't managed to quite gather a statistic for this, we were seeing nationally around 20,000 early retirements in the aerospace sector, which of course means you're losing a lot of the skills at the top end, potentially legacy skills and niche skills as well. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick kind of illustration of the activities we've taken and the timescale we work to. So technically, I think we were formally approved to run the Trailblazer in October, and we recruited a team, developed our methodology, put together an events program, as you can see, which is quite intense for the period in which we run it, and started engaging businesses as soon as possible. So the first few were slightly warmer, friendlier leads so that we could go in and test what we were asking and make sure that what businesses were telling us was actually of value. We've put in here total engagements 163. So we drew a line in the sand essentially and said, we are only going to formally include in-depth engagements in our methodology. And that means approximately 40 minutes or more of one-to-one interview, or a really in-depth collaborative event discussing elements of this. And we haven't included where we've spoken to businesses more than once. So there are some companies where we've spoken to 4 or 5 people across the company, working in operations, HR, C-suite, other roles. We've only included that as one engagement. So the engagement here means an in-depth business engagement, not a person or not someone we've presented to and things like that. You can probably see in the box again on the right that the events, we had one fairly early event and then all the others came in the new year. We managed to hold a significant number of these in a physical capacity, which was quite nice, but quite a lot of the events were digital. Merits to both. I don't think I need to go into that. We've all done quite a lot of this over the last few months. Next slide, please. I think this is where I hand over to Lauren, who's going to go through some of the initial findings.
Super, thank you, Matt, for that. So yes, I'm Lauren. I'm an engagement executive for the LSIP and conducted interviews largely with the health and social care sector. So we have on the slide some bullet points that I will now further elaborate on. So a common thread in our findings showed that managers in the care sector rated an employee's aptitude and attitude far more important than any prior technical skills when recruiting. The required mentality being to treat residents how you would treat your own family. Therefore, soft skills required included like patience, empathy, to be caring in nature with a willingness to get stuck in with a wide range of activities. So technical skills such as hoist training and IT competencies are very much considered as skills that can be taught on the job. The perception of care is a deeply values-driven vocation, which was consistently evident in our anecdotal discussions, as well as academic studies of care workers and managers. The COVID pandemic ripped through our society as the way in which the various restrictions, despite being necessary and understood, affect the day-to-day provision of high quality care. So for example, face masks, social distancing, the restrictions of family visits in care homes have all had a huge cumulative impact on both staff morale and on their ability to deliver the absolutely critical value and passion-based elements of the job. This has been compounded by the level and intensity of the long-term trauma care workers have all experienced as a result of the sheer volume of illness, death, and isolation amongst service users and staff alike. This mental health toll is causing direct burnout and created the care in crisis narrative, which is widely reported by the media now. So our findings show that this is gradually eroding the motivations of those workers who've stayed in the job for years, despite the challenges of low pay compared to high levels of skill, stress and responsibility because of their passion and values in working in an intense, close and interpersonal way. So within a wider societal context in which social care is hugely undervalued, both financially and in terms of social status, the sector has long struggled with pay, progression and job security. Whereas healthcare is a nationalised public sector system, the social care sector is fragmented across large-scale and small-scale independent providers and statutory providers. This presents huge challenges in terms of business resilience and adaptability, and the balance between private and statutory provision as commissioned through local authorities. The lack of funding makes it difficult to reward staff at an appropriate level for the work that they do, which therefore exacerbates the challenges associated with recruitment and retention. The sector struggles to recruit and loses existing staff at a high rate due to other sectors at the best of times because of the discrepancy between pay and responsibility levels. The sector utilises a broad range of recruitment methods, including job sites such as Indeed, and increasingly social media platforms such as Facebook. Difficulty to attract applicants remain. This has been largely due to the negative stereotypes and limited awareness within the general population and within most schools of what care work really entails and what career options exist within it. So the words "not just a care worker" was a common phrase in our findings, with many in the sector agreeing there needs to be a re-education piece of what care means. In regard to upskilling, there is a widely accepted need for people management and leadership skills to facilitate recruitment, development and retention plans. It was further noted there's a lack of awareness of progression routes, as well as not knowing where to look for funded training. The message that social care does have career pathways needs to be promoted more, especially the opportunities that are available. Training providers are doing more to collaborate with care organisations to create cohesive career pathways that can be incorporated in a flexible way into work practice to aid with retention, upskilling and progression. Skills and qualification levels within the sector are typically low, with many employees staying within the same role for years. Furthermore, one interviewee explained, "You're always going to have the people that either want to progress and can't, so then they leave, meaning you're left with the people who don't have as much experience at the bottom, or the people who stay and have the experience and probably could progress, but there isn't necessarily the role there for them to do that." So in terms of current gaps, care organisations are still recognising IT skills as lacking amongst the older members of staff. So affiliated level 3+ qualifications attached to more general workplace upskilling could be seen as beneficial. The sector has been experiencing an unprecedented level of staff absences due to COVID. One large care sector provider estimated in early January that 15 to 20% of staff were off isolating regionally. This has resulted in care workers often being asked to take on further responsibilities, such as cleaning tasks, secretarial work, as well as more healthcare type responsibilities, such as recording blood pressure, in order to bridge the gaps. This has further added to the increase of staff burnout. Next slide, please. So there's a clear requirement to develop employees' digital skills as the sector moves to an electronic care programmes. The large care providers already have combined CRM and scheduler systems. However, it has been noted that some of the small organisations are still fairly paper-based. One interviewee explained that there's a lot of aspiration at the moment in terms of how we can deliver our services in a more digitally enabled way. During the pandemic, we were forced to take a lot of stuff on virtually, so that's a really good opportunity to look at other things to incorporate digital solutions into the way that we work. However, this comes with a lot of training as well. we've looked at using VR as part of this. Technological shift is slow, though there is some understanding on integrated care and potential of technologies, i.e. sensors, automation, digital integration platforms, etc., to alleviate the pressures, but is not enacted. People are not integrating technological change if they do not see drivers to do so, or requirements either in the supply chain or policy shift, as well as the idea that replacing human contact with technology may negatively affect the quality of care provided. There is some awareness of the specific requirements for sustainability, e.g. recycling, using LED lights, etc., with the limited knowledge on how to become net zero, but this is not prioritised as the sector is still in recovery mode from the pandemic. The industry is very reactive as opposed to proactive when it comes to issues such as this. Another impact of the changing climate that has been recognised by the sector is that the colder winters and hotter summers are leading to mortality increases, but there is little advice or support on how to fully prepare for this. And then finally, as previously mentioned, burnout is high amongst staff, meaning the need for mental health first aid, as well as wellbeing sessions and access to resources would be a welcomed addition. However, delivery of this training is extremely challenging due to the shortage of staff, compounded with the long hours worked, resulting in employees have little energy left for such training, thus sadly creating a catch-22 scenario. So thank you for listening, and I'll throw back over to Matt.
I'm just going to go through some of the headline aerospace and advanced engineering findings as well. So the first theme to pick up on was digitalization, and this was probably one of the most interesting in-depth conversations we took outline. So there's wide recognition that the opportunities attached to digitalization of engineering and technologies are vast, but that said, everyone has a slightly different view of what digitalization means. Everyone has slightly different requirements to do with digitalization, and there's quite a bit more investigation to potentially look at into mapping out in a meaningful way what digitalization means at different stages of the supply chain and at different stages of growth, and ensuring that provision going forwards is appropriate for everyone who wants to take advantage of this element of technological upskilling. And alongside a couple of other things, we're continuing to have meaningful conversations with some of the key partners and key stakeholders across the region to see how we can meaningfully gather further data outside of the Trailblazer limitations. The other really kind of major thing is net zero and sustainability. That it feels like people are vastly aware that at some point they are going to have to be net zero, net carbon zero, improve their sustainability, and actually mitigate all of the impact of their operations. But not an awful lot outside of operational sustainability is being done outside of the people at the top of the supply chain, because business is driven by demand, and so you're producing towards tendering. So there's this really interesting potential where we need to find the right balance between leading a horse to water and ensuring that you can pay for it. God, that was a mangled metaphor. The other bits of sustainability that were quite interesting are the different modes of making aviation and flight itself more sustainable. And I think most people are aware now that there are three main methodologies of doing this: sustainable aviation fuels, electrification, and hydrogen. And there's really quite different situations for each. So sustainable aviation fuels is almost business as normal. There's very little that needs to be incorporated to utilize that. And then you have electrification, which everyone is aware is happening. There's already, I think, an estimated 100,000 person shortage of electric vehicle engineers and mechanics nationally, and you will electrify everything you can because it's the most mature technology and it makes the most sense on the balance sheet. But in the middle there's this gap, and hydrogen, although may not be the perfect solution, is the current best placed solution to fill that middle section of the shorter haul and European flights and requirements on the ground, and to replace a lot of fossil fuels. And so we need to develop knowledge on hydrogen. So there's conversations going on. I'm not sure if Chris Steele has logged in or not, but this may well come up in the Q&A. But we now have the Southwest Hydrogen Ecosystem Partnership that's looking to learn what is happening, take the best bits and improve on what's happening for the benefit of our region, and to really be leaders in this thought. And there's also the Hydrogen Skills Consortium working on actual content for delivery, so that people who have a definitive and current need for hydrogen upskilling have the ability to do so. And these conversations are incorporating our other partners like the Institute of Technology as well. A number of businesses have said it can take quite a long time for someone out of formal training to become workforce ready. And also alongside that, they've said that what they do is quite niche. So we've been looking at whether there is any meaningful way to, across the sector, close the gap between leaving training and being workforce ready, and more conversations continuing on that. I'd say most of the businesses we spoke to recognise the potential benefits of upskilling, retraining and incorporating technology in aerospace and advanced engineering, particularly in light of the rising salaries. Chris Steele's just entered. I wonder if he heard me say he might be here. Yeah, most people recognise that this is one of the ways they will need to stay globally competitive and significant. And so I think more people are looking for more knowledge to work out exactly what are the right technological changes and the directions to take their companies. That said, technological uptake can be quite slow. Again, it's delivered against tier 1 demand, and so people tend to operate in the spheres they operate in, and whilst they're aware of the things they may need to do in the near future, they may not always perceive they have the capacity to do this. And there's potentially some work to be done in helping businesses prepare for workforce development in the future, but we'll come to that a little bit more. And then lots of people have fairly specific technical requirements, which is unsurprising when you're working in a fairly specific technical field. But is there anything we can do for micro alignments to make sure that what is being delivered in apprenticeships and level 3 and upwards is most appropriate for businesses? Next slide, please. There's big differences in between sizes of companies and ability to adapt and plan, and I don't think that's surprising to anyone, but a lot of the recommendations we put forward are about making sure that the environment is as conducive as possible for SMEs and smaller companies to feed in a meaningful way to anything that shifts, whether that's modes or contents or methods of delivery. I think home working and corporate culture and osmotic learning, I don't want to preach to the choir here, but recognition is quite high that when you're all working remotely, there are certain elements that you may not necessarily consider overtly prior to the pandemic that you need to incorporate more fully in a hybrid or a remote or a virtual working environment to ensure that people are getting the best potential learning and development opportunities. And then lots of people have identified opportunities to diversify, and people are picking up more internal functions within the same roles. So alongside marketing and sales, people need to do more in leadership, more in communication, internal and external, more problem solving. The softer skills across the board, I think, for both sectors are often, I think most reports, whether they're looking into technical education or anything else, suggest that people really want more problem solving, more communication and more leadership. We've highlighted here again, for young people, do not necessarily leave with the skills required for older technology. I've been rolling out a bit of an anecdote from social care recently, and I know I'm talking about aerospace, but one person reported having an apprenticeship start to working an administration role, and they'd studied IT at post-16 level, and they didn't know how to open or send an email or format a spreadsheet, although they could do the basis of coding in JavaScript and C++. So potentially there's a bit of a disconnect in the way people are learning IT and digital skills for the workplace. Succession planning, I mentioned this probably quite a bit earlier now. Hopefully I'm roughly on time, Chloe, but we've lost a lot of the maturer end of the workforce, people who've been doing this for a long time, people who have a lot of different levels and a wealth of knowledge that is quite hard to rapidly re-inject into a company. And so there's going to be some really interesting challenges in ensuring that the older legacy systems and some of the really specific technical knowledge isn't lost from this region and this country and this sector, because a lot of that is to do with our cutting edge competitiveness and our ability to continue in innovation. Next slide, please. So I think this is modes and methods of delivery, and I'm probably just going to scan through this quickly. A reminder at this stage, and I don't know, Claire, if you had planned this, but we have both the full report, all 81 pages of magnificence up available on our website, and there's also two smaller and easier to read sector statements for each of these areas, so you can read all of this to your heart's content and come back to us and ask us any questions you like. But apprenticeships work well when relationships are really strong. It's been a challenging time for these hybrid courses with workforce requirements, particularly in the slightly more secure sectors, when it's been essential pathways only on site. And of course, there's been a bit of a loss of chain of custody in some circumstances, but overwhelmingly businesses report when they have a good mutual working relationship with the training providers, then these are working well. And yeah, again, businesses often describe needs as niche. They use general providers for health and safety and forklift training and things like that, but then often they refer to on the job and replicative training in-house. So see one, do one, teach one kind of principles. Again, I've gone back to health and social care, apologies. SMEs really like on-the-job training. Part of this is because they see it's most directly replicable to what they do, but part of this is constraints, time constraints, resource constraints. If an employee is doing it at work, then it's minimizing their time out of work. They often use less formal modes of delivery as well, and there is quite a lot of online learning, slightly less formal learning. And we've had reports of people previously to this looking at hydrogen and using Google to work out what they need to know and what they don't already know, because no more formal training exists in that. But there's been a vast change in technological uptake. The oft quoted figure at the beginning of the pandemic was that people had absorbed 6 months of technological, 6 years of technological change in 6 months. And this is to a degree true across a lot of different technologies and sectors. Next slide, please. So towards the end of the report, there's pathways to what we think we need to change and recommendations and things like that. I should probably say that the LSIP itself is very illustrative and not prescriptive. We as the Chambers of Commerce and Business Engagement team are business focused to a degree, and we're aware that there are education and training providers and skills experts there who will be much better placed potentially to say exactly how this should be incorporated. Not that we're not doing that as well, but the report itself is very much, this is what businesses have said they need. This is how we think it can be meaningfully incorporated. So overwhelmingly, people like modular, they like flexible, they like things to be connected so that you can professionally develop and receive certification at the time. And one of the things we've said alongside this is that the structure and the financing systems need to change. There needs to be more fat in the system to let people adapt, to let people engage and to respond quickly to what businesses say they need. And I believe all of the Trailblazers have reported similar back to the Department for Education. We, particularly towards the smaller end of the scale, it feels like there's still more work to be done to help businesses work out what they need to do. I used the phrase recursive workforce development for a while, but nobody knew what it meant except for me. But it's doing workforce development to help develop the workforce. Until you know how to analyze the landscape and analyze the changing needs of your company, you can't effectively plan for your future training provision. So there's potentially more work to help bring some of the smaller companies up to the ability to do so. I think we've repeatedly highlighted the value of working relationships between employers and training providers, where there is an atmosphere of trust and both parties are looking to meaningfully gain from the engagement, then things go really well. And where that is less two-sided, it can fail. Simultaneously, businesses are somewhat reluctant to try new things in some circumstances. So if there is a failing, it can almost put a business off that element of workforce development altogether. The pathways through the sectors, strangely, both sectors feel like they're not highlighted at early enough ages as meaningful careers and pathways through life. Engineering still seen a bit as grease and spanners and dirt under your nails, and care sectors seen as, you know, overwhelmingly, unfortunately, unskilled and as just a care worker, as I think Lauren said, whereas actually there is a whole world of roles around care and within the care sector, and pathways both through care to a degree and into affiliated sectors. So that it would be helpful to highlight that more widely and at a younger age. And then tight margins. It's the same on both sides of the relationship at the moment. The margins are quite small. Training providers don't have an awful lot to play with to help companies get the best out of the environment, and companies don't have an awful lot to play with to get the best out of their employees. And this is one of the things we've hopefully highlighted, and the others have highlighted to the Department for Education, that we firmly believe, I may have said this already, more fat in the system so that education and training providers can respond better. I think, so I've mentioned the statements and the full reports out. And one thing I haven't mentioned is the vast wealth of partners and stakeholders and colleagues that we've worked with throughout this process. So alongside the core partners of the Mayoral Combined Authority for the West of England and the Institute of Technology, we've worked with G1 LEP, we've worked with the Southwest LEP, we've worked with a vast number of education and training providers and sector representatives and specialists and consultants and all manner, for whom we are immensely grateful for their support and input. We are looking at doing more work going forwards, and potentially we'll come to that in the second session. I'm going to be quiet. I might hand over to you, Claire, if that's all right. Are we into Q&A?
Yes, so we'll now go into the Q&A session. Thanks, Matt. Like we've mentioned before, if you have any questions now, you can either pop them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand using the Zoom tool, mine is in the participant section in the toolbar. If you click that, then I can come to you and you can ask your questions directly to Lauren or Matt. So I've had one come through privately. So this one is probably for Lauren, as it's regarding social care. So the question is, could you give some examples of some of the ways that the social care sector said they could help change the perceived negative stereotype of working in care?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. So I think a lot of the suggestion was more about going into schools, getting care workers to go into schools and actually talk about what care really means by talking through their experiences, talking about the wide-ranging activities they get up to, because I think as well there's a perception that they do 2 or 3 things on like a repeat, whereas actually no 2 days are the same. And there's very much like a family ethos that when you join care, you know, your colleagues aren't just your colleagues, they're your family, the residents that you take care of, you know, they're part of your extended family. So I guess it's going in and really talking about what care means, trying to change that negative stereotype of it. And actually some people we spoke to said that it doesn't just start from, I guess, post-16 education. It almost needs to start at primary school level. So when like both boys and girls are wanting to start thinking about the kind of subjects they want to take at senior school or the careers they might want to go into, they almost need to have career talks at that age as well.
That's great. Thank you, Lauren. That's a really useful answer. I've had another one come in. I have a feeling this is going to be better for Matt. So how do you think sectors will be chosen for the phase 2 rollout?
So it's an interesting conundrum at the moment. Obviously, each region has their kind of priority current sectors, and they have their foresighting, what they think they would like to maximise on going forward. But as yet, as far as I am aware, and some of the partners on the call may have a slightly different view, we haven't had any guidance on how the next local skills improvement plan phase 1 rollout will choose what is going to be looked at in terms of sectors or industries. I do know that some of the other Trailblazers were entirely sector agnostic. I know as well that one of the Trailblazers looked entirely at, I would do air quotes, but I'm not quite sure whether I need to, green jobs and green skills. And so really focused in on sustainability and what that might mean for the changing workforce. And I know a lot of people have looked at technological shift, or at least elements of technological shift. One of the things we wrote into our recommendations and pathway, and it was a suggestion, and it wasn't necessarily we definitively think this is the way to go, but we've written something in that suggests that technological drivers of change may be an interesting way to look into the future. So how does digitalization outside of aerospace affect industries? What does it mean for, you know, agriculture, agri-tech? What digital technologies can be meaningfully incorporated there? Or again, within health and social care, like the integrated, oh, sorry, I was going to say integrated care commissioning service, which is something entirely else. The integrated platforms that care providers use to put together agendas and patient notes and inbound inquiries and schedulers for their workforce. There is an awful lot of technological innovation happening at pan sector, and potentially be quite interesting to pick up something like that. The other one we've highlighted, of course, is sustainability. In aerospace, you have flags in the sand for hydrogen, but I don't think anyone, if anyone on this call is from the aerospace sector, will mind me saying, they're probably going to be quite late adopters. They're just more able in this instance to plan more forward thinkingly. Mangling my words again, but you know, they've said we are going to have to do something, and this is the option we have, therefore we need to plan for it. But hydrogen aviation is going to come probably after hydrogen marine, hydrogen logistics, hydrogen heating, hydrogen electric generation. It's already after hydrogen domestic and personal vehicles. So there's probably going to be quite a lot of driving of change via aerospace, when they will probably be one of the last to actually benefit from it and incorporate it in a commercially viable way. And there's lots of other things: cobotics, robotics, teleoperation, almost as one area. The Internet of Things, 5G, sensors. You know, the list goes on and on. But potentially we should look at some of these across the region or the wider region and see how they affect the current most important sectors and the future most important sectors.
Thanks, Matt. Actually, before we move on, we just have had one more question through that relates more to this section. So we've had one through from Will. So Will said, have any care organisations spoken about how they are changing their recruitment practices in order to demonstrate a greater focus on softer skills rather than the technical skills, and how they are pushing this message with both residents and recruitment pathways? And I don't know who wants to take that one, because you could probably both cover it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question. I think especially from the interviews anyway, when I've spoken to managers in particular of care homes, they have said that they take a values-based approach to their interviews. So when you do like a job application online, whether it's on Indeed or like through social media and stuff, often they don't say like prerequisites of having this qualification, or, you know, for example, having prior knowledge of hoist training and that sort of thing. It's more kind of personality based. And then when they have the interview, sometimes they put them into scenarios. So that, you know, they say, you know, if you were to encounter this situation in a care home, how would you react to that? And then I think it's more about, based on those answers, they will then look to take them on, you know, and then the training comes from their peers. So some of the training is more structured than others. I think the bigger the care providers, they use external training providers. There might be schemes where they can go and sit like quizzes and exams and things like that. Some of the smaller providers, they shadow for the more technical skills and things. But I'm not sure if there was anything further to add on that, unless Matt, you had anything.
Possibly from a slightly different angle, but yeah, so they've reported they're trying everything. It's you know, almost universally not been easy to recruit for quite a long time. It's not perceived as a valued career pathway a lot of the time. So since you know, Brexit and COVID, they're more flexible in their recruitment approaches, and they will try anything. There's quite a lot as well. The recognition that the phrase is midlifers, and I feel like I'm in that band, and I don't know how I feel about the phrase used to refer to myself, but midlifers are often looking at career changes and looking for things that are more meaningful and values driven, and so potentially there is some opportunity to focus on more audiences who are looking at changes of career rather than people who are looking at, you know, school leavers and things like that. So the summative answer from my perspective is that they're doing everything they can to attempt to recruit, but it's difficult. What they can pay is linked to commissioning rates, and that is essentially below other roles. You know, we've had people say that, you know, Amazon put up posters everywhere, and that it's perceived as much easier, and they're paying £3 more an hour. It's very hard sometimes to compete about that. So as Lauren has said, you know, it is, I think in a previous answer as well, it's about changing the perspective of the care sector and making sure people recognise the rewards that are attached to working within it as well.
It's both. We haven't had any more come through now, so I would suggest if we move on to the second half, which is more about the phase 2 rollout, and then if anyone does have any other questions that they thought of since this, we do have another Q&A session just shortly after, so feel free to ask away then. But yeah, use the chat or use the raise your hand tool, either are fine.
Thank you. So you'll have to forgive me, I'm fairly sure that at this present stage I only have one slide attached to this because of reasons I've kind of highlighted already. We do have a little bit more information that's gone than is on this slide, but it'd be interesting to talk about the national rollout a bit more. So things we do know, all of the Trailblazers went to Chambers of Commerce and were coordinated by the British Chambers of Commerce, and we know that the next round is going to be open to employer representative bodies. We also believe that LSIPs have been written out of this process to a degree so that they can't put themselves forwards as employer representative bodies. We know there's going to be 40 to 50 in the first phase 1 rollout, which means that it's not likely to cover every patch geographically in the country, but it will cover a vast swathe of it. As we also know that they will now, they will now be aligned with LEP areas, county deals and combined authority areas. So we know the geography that they will come up with, which is counter to the one we put forwards in our Trailblazer, aligning with the Institute of Technology's wider patch and the functional economic market area. So looking much more at defining business geographies than government geographies. So yeah, we know what geographies. So we won't be doing this again in a formal way, incorporating elements of regions. They will be region based. It says expected national rollout later this year. So we now know that this is still the same, but we have some slightly more definitive data. We are expecting the initial information about the expression of interest in the next 2 weeks. We've been told before mid-May we will receive that from central government, and it will be publicly and freely available for everyone to see. And we have been told that the initial stages of closure of this process will be early autumn. Beyond that, as I've talked about in sectors and industries that may be looked at, we don't know how this is going to be chosen. We do know that all of the Trailblazers were very different. They're all being evaluated at the moment. It feels like a lifetime ago that we actually completed it, but it hasn't been that long since the Trailblazers were all submitted, and so the Department for Education is weighing them up at the moment. yeah, it would be really interesting to see what they have perceived as meaningful difference when people have chosen either specific sectors or been sector agnostic or looked at drivers, e.g. net zero and climate change, and whether they perceive any of these to be of a unique benefit and therefore all of the Trailblazers should go forwards with them, or whether it is a much more open process again, in that regions pick what they believe is the most important priority to focus on in the LSIPs going forwards. The other bit, the principle, so I think I said right at the beginning, we went really with an in-depth methodology. We didn't think we could do anything without talking and really engaging with businesses. How is your business doing? How is your business growing? What do you need? What do you not have? What do you currently have that works really well? And all that kind of stuff. But other methods, one of the Trailblazers developed an app and asked sector agnostic questions of businesses once a day for a month. Others used, light to touch telephone surveys or online portals for responses. Yeah, so the methodologies chosen by the 8 Trailblazers were all quite different. It's very hard to say whether anyone else has found data of more depth or of more use to a region. And I'm not 100% sure whether others have looked at only gathering data that wasn't already available through other sources. So there's a lot we don't know. But that said, if we do another event like this in a month's time or so, we may actually have some really interesting information on the phase 1 rollout. I think, Chloe, that's probably all I have to say about this at this stage. I did think when we planned this event, I might have slightly more of a tangible nature to talk about at that point. So apologies, we may finish slightly earlier.
Thanks, Matt. So if we move in just to the second Q&A session now, so please do fill up the chat with any questions or raise your hand. I'm going to go to Corinne's question. So Corinne has asked, if the new rollout is going to be by LEP geography, how will the Institute of Technology align to the future programme?
That's a very good question, and I'm not sure whether Claire Arbery would like to answer anything here, or whether I should try and field this.
It is a question with ministers at the moment. For those of you who don't know, institutes of technology were based on employer footprints and economic areas that we had to go through quite a rigorous process to justify why we were operating in those regions. And this piece of work around LSIPs and strategic development funds has kind of tested it and has started to create some fractures in parts of the IoT delivery, not just here, but across the whole of the country. In other areas, there are mayoral combined authorities that actually have 2 or 3 IoTs that footprint within part of their delivery boundaries as well. So it's something that ministers have had to take away and think about. I think it's an unintended consequence of their plan to share the funding equally across different LEP geographies, but haven't really kind of considered the wider impact. So I haven't got an answer on it, but it is something that we're working actively with the department and ministers to resolve.
Yeah, from my perspective, it felt a bit of a surprise. I think that, like Claire said, we're working through the ramifications a little bit still. Thanks, Corinne.
Thanks, Claire, for kind of chipping in there as well. That was really useful. We don't have any other questions coming through at the moment. So I would suggest if anyone does think of any questions at a later date, please do get in touch with Matt or the LSIT team, and we'd be happy to cover them at a later date. And it looks like we're going to finish nice and early, which is always a bonus for a Zoom call. So I'm going to hand back to Matt now to close everything up.
Yeah, so I mean, I was just going to say to start with, if anyone just wants to blurt anything out, we don't need to do hands or Q&A if you'd just like to jump in at the stage. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to go get a cup of tea It's quite a nice break. It's not often these online events seem to finish that early, and so it's nice to claw some time back. I just thank you to everyone for coming to this event. We will send you the video link, and there's a number of links in the chat, which Chloe, I'm assuming, will go out again in event follow-up as well. But please do get in touch. We'd love to chat. For those of you who don't know Business West by this stage, we have a number of business-focused functions running from currently import and export services, Department for International Trade, Innovate UK, trading to net zero, finance and funding, enterprise, and a whole wealth of other things. So please do just feel free to ask us about any element of that. Everything to do with the local skills improvement plan for the West of England Plus region is available on our website, which is listed there and also in the chat. Please do have a look at the circled documents on there. I will be sharing a very short executive summary of what we did and how we did it and why we did it and what it means in the not too distant future. Once again, thank you for coming, and I will hopefully speak to you all again, I and the rest of the LSIT team, in the not too distant future.